Welcome back to Get Paid for Your Pad. I am very excited because I have an amazing guest today. Her name is Jayla Siciliano. She's the host of the Seed Money podcast. She's a real estate short-term rental investor. She's also a former Shark Tank entrepreneur. She got a deal with the famous entrepreneur Mark Cuban, and she's currently on a mission to help early-stage entrepreneurs take the next steps to turn their idea into a reality. Jayla, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. So fun to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so excited. I've seen some episodes of Shark Tank in the past, and it's very fascinating. And I'm super excited to learn a little bit more of the ins and outs and maybe some behind the scenes stuff that we don't necessarily see on the TV. And I would love to also hear your story of the companies that you founded, your experiences. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into it. I know you also manage 20 luxury short-term rental properties, so we'll touch on that as well. But I'd love to learn more about your experience. Let's just kick it off with Shark Tank. Like, how did you get involved with that?
Yeah, I'm an open book, so happy to describe any of the juicy details. I had founded a wine company, and I raised money through private investors to kick it off the ground. The short story is I ran into some massive production issues out of the gate. And I was faced with having to go out and raise more money, which was challenging, after you've raised a first round and run into all these production issues. And one of my advisors kept bugging me to go on Shark Tank to apply. And I'm like, I don't want to go on that show. And then I finally had to go meet him again for coffee. And I was like, I just need to apply so that he stops bugging me. So I applied. And, sure enough, I think it was like 8 months later or something, I got a call from one of the producers, jumped through a lot of hoops, to get on. It's a pretty intense application process, and ended up getting on the show. And it was even the leading up to getting on the show was a roller coaster. So it was just a crazy experience, overall. Definitely very intense. Looking back, kind of can't believe I did it, one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, happy to expand on it, or however much you want me to share. I'm totally happy to share. I can give you the whole story, or nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. Well, there might be some people listening who haven't seen the show. Like, could you explain briefly what the show is about?
Yeah. So essentially, you have entrepreneurs who get up in front of a panel of investors. It's the, rotating, I think, 7 investors every episode. And entrepreneurs get up, they pitch their deal, and they get asked a ton of questions. And the investors decide if they want to invest or not. The crazy part is, the show, when you watch it, is about 10 minutes, your clip, 10 to 12 minutes, but I was in there for over an hour, and they edit it down, to that 10 minutes. So yeah, I ended up getting a deal with Mark Cuban. I think I've heard all the sharks are really great. They say sharks, but they're really all in it for the right reasons. They're very involved. They contribute tons of resources outside of just, money to these businesses, and the marketing exposure you get, they've got huge viewer stats. So it's just a huge injection of marketing to your company, which is the really cool part.
Were you nervous when you stood in front of those investors?
Well, so it's funny. A little insight into who I am. I research things to death, and I got up, for months before getting up there to actually film it. And I watched every episode. I wrote down every question the sharks asked. I mean, I rehearsed that pitch, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And when I actually went there, they give you your film date. I'm there in my dressing room trailer, ready to go, finally, okay, going to get this over with. And the producers come in and they're like, we're so sorry, you're not going to get to pitch today. We don't know if you'll get to actually do the show. And it was just one of those like, what? Wasn't expecting that, didn't know that was a possibility. Drove home, and it was just a surreal moment of, you practice so much for something, to not even be able to get it off your chest is kind of, a such a downer, right? And I was like, okay, whatever, keep pushing along. And a few days later, the producer called and she's like, there's a 50-50 chance you'll get to pitch tomorrow. Do you want to come up? I was like, I'll be there, so drive up. There I am again in the, dressing room waiting. And at this point, I was super nervous before, but I think because I almost didn't have the opportunity at this point, I was just so thankful to get a chance to do it again. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go into this and try to have fun. This is an incredible life experience. So the way it worked out, I was actually a lot less nervous going in there than I might have been the first time because I almost didn't have the opportunity. But, it was still a blur. The producers, they said, if you go out there, if you pee your pants, we're not stopping filming. Like no matter what, once you're out there, they can edit anything into the show that they want. So it is nerve wracking, from that standpoint, just that, it's definitely high pressure.
I can imagine. Yeah. So was it the wine company that you were pitching for?
Yeah. So I started, I spent my first part of my career working for Diesel Footwear and Burton Snowboards, both like very heavy drinking culture kind of companies. And I was always really active and healthy. This was in the early 2000s. And I saw a gap in the market for kind of a lighter, healthier alcohol option. At the time, all of these seltzers, none of this existed. It was basically, wine coolers of the 80s, beer and wine. And so I decided I could do it, very naive. I had no idea what I was doing in the alcohol industry. Decided to just quit my job and go for it. Life is short. Why not? And dove, head first into it, quickly realized like, whoa, this is a bigger undertaking than I anticipated. Flew through my savings, 401k, all of that. But now it's an $11 billion category, huge category in the alcohol space. But I was definitely kind of one of the first ones to try to push that along, which isn't easy to do, creating a new category, educating customers and stuff like that is expensive and challenging for sure. So, but great experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like at least for me, when I started as an entrepreneur, I thought it was all about having the best idea, right? So I was like, okay, I just got to come up with a brilliant idea, and then like everything will work out, right? And then you realize like, okay, an idea is really like nothing, right?
Tip of the iceberg, yeah.
I love the founding story of Airbnb because they were so close to not getting the company off the ground, and it just reminds me like of that concept of like you can have a brilliant idea. Clearly, Airbnb was a brilliant idea if you look at it now, right? But it was so hard to make it happen, right? So yeah, so you pitched this idea to Shark Tank, to the investors. What was the response from the investors that you were pitching to?
It was mixed. Damon John was like, "You're going to need way more money." He had invested in, I think, maybe a tequila company or something, so he knew the alcohol industry pretty well. He was like, "You're going to need millions and millions of dollars." Mr. Wonderful, he was actually in the wine industry, but this again, not being regular wine, he was just like, I don't know about this. I'd like to help, but I'm not sure. And then Mark Cuban ended up basically saying, I think my wife would love this. People do want to be healthy and want to drink. And, I think he saw how much I'd put into it just as an entrepreneur effort wise, and he decided to invest. So overall, it was good.
It's amazing. And then on the show that's announced, right? So on the show, Mark Cuban was like, okay, I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to invest. Do you hear the amount or right away or?
Yep. So you go out asking for an amount. And at that point, again, I was on the verge of like possibly going out of business because we had all these issues. So you do have to pick a valuation when you go on Shark Tank. The previous round, I raised about $500,000 as convertible notes where you don't have to pick a valuation. But on Shark Tank, you do. And they will just chew you up if your valuation's, ridiculously high. So I looked at it, my previous investors, we all saw it as a really strategic opportunity to get airtime on the show, to get an influential investor. And so we went out there asking for $150,000 for 35% of the company, which is like nothing, right? So Mark, there was no negotiating. I think he was like, okay, that's as kind of low as you can go, right? So he gave us that amount. But again, with all the resources and stuff that he, provided, it was really so much more about, all of that than the 150,000. And he did end up financing inventory runs for us also. So he sort of acted as a bank, which was super helpful.
Mm-hmm. And so how did it turn out, the business?
So it was a few years of really, going crazy, grinding. I was traveling like constantly. Just the alcohol space could not get it profitable. I mean, you're giving your distributors 30%, your retailers anywhere from 20 to 40%, having to do tastings. It's just a very expensive category to be in. And looking back also, I mean, there's so many layers and complexities to how this kind of went about. But in a nutshell, essentially, I just got to the point where I was going to have to keep raising money. With every round, I got diluted more and more. And I was just killing myself. And my husband and I had put off starting a family. And, I really got into this because I wanted, I saw a need for the product and I actually wanted more freedom and flexibility than working in this corporate job. And I basically woke up one day with my own company going, I'm miserable and I'm just killing myself. I'm working like crazy. I'm traveling like crazy. We're going to have kids. I don't want to be the mom that's gone all the time, and it was a very, very hard decision, but I had to make the choice to basically, walk away. And I had the support of all my investors. They understood. I think the market timing was really key there too. Had I known that that category was going to completely take off, like White Claw came out the year I closed the company.
Oh, wow.
And they really like blew up the space. They had the marketing
Mhm.
dollars, the distribution. And so, had I known that that was about to happen, maybe I would have pushed through, but still it just wasn't the right thing. I had high blood pressure, I was super stressed. And so it's funny, that's how I kind of ended up, now being in real estate. While it's not this sexy product in wine, it really gives me the true lifestyle and freedom that I ultimately wanted, when I first started that. So it came full circle. But yeah, it was definitely a bummer, very painful, to go through that. But I've learned now it's part of entrepreneurship. The more common story is entrepreneurs who have to pivot and face making that decision. And it's a tough one, not fun. Wouldn't wish it on anyone, but incredible. Makes you stronger for sure, and you grow so much and get great experience out of it.
Yeah, I was talking to a business partner the other day, and we recognized that the only constant in our business is change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true.
It's, um,
Gotta
but yeah,
roll.
it can be very difficult to deal with the uncertainties and like the doubt, right? I'm sure you, in your journey, like you probably ask yourself multiple times, like, is this really worth it? Like, you making a lot of sacrifices to make this dream happen. What are some of the biggest learning lessons that you got from that experience?
I would say the biggest learning lessons that I fortunately did learn from and am doing differently now in this short-term rental business. One, not allowing myself to get burnt out. I think my dad was an entrepreneur and I grew up around more that mentality of like, you got to do everything yourself, that kind of thing. And in that business, I was wearing so many hats. I had a team, I had employees and stuff, but I still just felt this pressure that I had to be doing everything, and I'm doing that very, very differently now. I've gotten a team who's experienced delegating. I've gotten so much better at that. The other thing is, I think, staying focused. That's something I really wish I had done differently. We were doing, online sales. We were selling at wholesale to grocery stores off premise, and we were selling on premise to bars and restaurants and clubs and resorts and stuff like that. And multiple states, shipping internationally. So just spreading ourselves way, way, way too thin. I think if I had just focused on online sales, which also online wine clubs were really just gaining momentum, so that wasn't quite as what a thing it is now. But had I focused on online sales, I think we could have gotten farther with less stress, and possibly been more reached profitability. So one thing I've done in the short-term rental business now, we actually started growing too fast, quickly ramped up to 30 properties very quickly in like a year, and was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Scaled it back to about 20 properties that are all, fit the same avatar, family, more luxury, bigger bang for the buck in terms of, bookings and stuff like that. So I was in multiple markets, narrowed it down to only 2 markets. So, that idea of being focused and staying focused and having that discipline is so hard to do, especially when you're just trying to grow. But I definitely learned my lesson there also, how important that is. It's a critical thing.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. And most of the companies and operators that join like some of our programs and masterminds, they typically, like, the first thing they do is they let go of a couple of properties, because when somebody else looks at the portfolio and asks some questions of like, hey, this unit is not really making any money, and like, sounds like the owner is giving you headaches. Like, why are you still managing that? And it's like, yeah, it's a very good question. Well, I guess I'm just afraid to let go of something, right? And then the first thing happens is that people let go of the units that they don't really want to be managing in the first place. So I think that's interesting. And yeah, definitely, like, shiny object syndrome is something that I think every early stage entrepreneur has, where you're so eager for opportunities and you're afraid to miss out on opportunities, and you just like jump on everything that comes your way. In the short-term rental business, we often see early operators like just kind of taking on whatever they can take on, right? And then at some point, to your point, it's like what we call the hectic host. It's like somebody who's like just has no idea really what they're doing anymore. There are a bunch of random properties and like no real systems and no real brand, and none of that stuff. So it's very very relatable. So right now you have 20 luxury vacation rentals. Which markets are you in?
Santa Barbara County and then Stowe, Vermont. Santa Barbara,
Okay, so
California,
like,
and Stowe, Vermont. So 3,000 miles apart.
and is there any particular reason why you chose those markets?
I just love to torture myself. No, I basically I live here in Santa Barbara. So we bought our first one in wine country here, and that was early COVID. Few different reasons we bought that one, but looking back, I think, being right here in our backyard, I felt a little more comfortable. I had long-term rentals before, but never short-term. And we also wanted it during COVID just as a place to go and get away, from our house. So that's what started it here. I grew up in New Hampshire, and we were getting ready to buy a second property. And we didn't want to buy one here because the regulations are a little bit up in the air and it's expensive, higher price points here, obviously. So we were looking in Big Bear, Pacific Northwest, and Vermont. We really wanted to kind of get one in a mountain town. We grew up snowboarding, all that stuff. And I kept looking at the numbers in Big Bear. Well, Big Bear was having all these regulation issues, Pacific Northwest and Vermont, and it just made sense in Vermont. And we go back there every summer. My brother still lives there. My parents are there in the summers. So we were like, okay, I think Vermont's the spot. We saw this place and we were like, that's it. And it's actually 20 minutes outside of Stowe. And locally, the town it's in doesn't have the best reputation, but it's this gorgeous property on 18 acres, beautiful ponds, very much that Vermont vibe. And people from Boston and New York, they just want that Vermont vibe. They don't necessarily know the local reputation of the town, right? Like Stowe is the cream of the crop town. But it's only 20 minutes. So it had all the bells and whistles of what someone's looking for going there, but it was a much better value than what you would pay for the same, a similar property 20 minutes away in Stowe. And that property, and then that just kind of spread, word of mouth, started managing other properties in that area. And it's funny, that one actually outperforms a lot of the Stowe properties, so it's funny how it works out, sometimes what you think might be the best location or value to location is, worth exploring those little outside pockets for sure.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the biggest challenges that you encountered while you were building this business in these two different locations?
I think the biggest one was the systems and processes, getting those set up while growing. Also, Vermont, it's really cold. You have mud season. The maintenance issues there are at least triple what we deal with here in Santa Barbara, so there's just always something there.
Mhm.
Mice, bugs, snow, mud, it's something all the time. So having a really strong team there was super important. And it's funny, in the beginning, you don't know what you don't know, right? You just kind of
Mhm.
dive in and start figuring it out. And I didn't realize how critical the systems and processes and tech piece of it was. And having those things and having a team that was not only utilizing those processes, but helping me, build them out. And so I did have to restructure the team a bit to, really get people who aligned with the tech we're using, the systems that we're using, and make sure everybody's on the same page. And now everything is running so much smoother than it was, at the beginning when not everybody was using the systems and it was just kind of a free for all. And it was a total hectic mess, but got that straightened out.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. How would like I feel like the short-term rental or in general hospitality business is very interesting because it's 24 hours. There's a lot of moving parts, right? How would you compare your current business to the businesses that you had in the past?
Yeah, I gotta say, this business is crazy. It is every once in a while, I'm like, it's just so weird that it's 24 hours a day. Your customer service is 24 hours a day. I mean, there aren't many businesses where you have to be like that. So, I think from that perspective, it is, it has its element of just that hectic side. The other thing that I think is a little bit challenging is you've got guests, you've got owners, and then you've got your whole, cleaning, all of that staff. So you're catering to a lot of different personalities, right? And so I think that dynamic, and it's just very urgent, with guests, you don't have time to resolve stuff slowly. Everything moves very, very quickly. Whereas with my old business, you're working with retailers, your end customers. It was a slower pace in that sense. So I do find hospitality, you really have to be on top of it from a customer service standpoint, but there's so many resources to do that now easily. You know what I mean? Like we use Breezeway. I love Breezeway. We use their Breezeway Assist, and it's been great. I have to say, they've been really wonderful. Virtual assistants, obviously, are wonderful. Training, having all the right trainings and processes in place is key, though. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's got its pros and cons, but overall, I think for the flexibility, the nice thing is when a guest leaves, you don't have to deal with them again, So, um,
Well, they might come back.
yeah, that's true. Yeah. But in the other business, if you have a buyer who is just a total jerk and you got to keep dealing with them over and over and over,
Mm.
you can't really get away from them. You need them. Whereas you do have a little more flexibility to choose who you want to work with in this business, which is nice.
Right. That's true. I mean, yeah, if you have somebody that you don't want to host again, like you're not obligated to host anybody, right? In the
Mhm.
end of the
Yeah.
day, obviously there's some complications with canceling bookings on Airbnb and whatnot, but in the end of the day, you are in control of who you host, I guess, right? Is
Mhm.
hospitality something that you always wanted to get into, or did you kind of get into it by occasion?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of by accident, but I will say I do love the design side of things. I've done a few. I've designed a few STRs for other people at this point. So I've always loved, aesthetics and design. My background previously was product development, design, and footwear and bags. So I absolutely love that part of it. I really do enjoy hosting, and the hospitality function of the business. We do welcome baskets and we go above and beyond with all these amenities. And the idea of people, just having this amazing time and being pleasantly surprised is really fun. I love that part of it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's not too far, away from kind of what I ultimately love to do in that sense.
Right. And so your management company is called Atlas Vacation Rentals, right?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the brand and who's your guest avatar and what kind of experiences are you providing?
Yeah, so I would say mostly our guest avatar are families, looking to either, we have a lot of people from LA coming up to wine country or coming to Santa Barbara. And in Vermont, it's mostly people from New York and Boston, going up to ski for the weekend or be in Vermont for the summer. So the properties, that do the best for us are the ones that have amenities where the whole family can hang on the property, friends and family can hang there and be entertained on property, or just a few minutes away, go out to dinner, go adventure and have stuff around the property close by that they can access easily. And, we do, again, the best performing properties in Vermont. We put snowshoes and cross country skis and all these things where they can really have this Vermont experience, these little add ons that don't cost the owners a lot of money, or us a lot of money. But they just kind of help fill out that experience. And I think when people are trying to decide between two properties, if they see one that has like all these little bells and whistles and one that doesn't, and the prices are the same, it's easy to lean towards the one that does. So.
Mm-hmm. If somebody comes up to you, and this probably happens actually, and asks you like, hey, that's short-term rental business that you have, that sounds really interesting, I want to get involved in this as well, right? What would be your number one piece of like advice for that person?
Join multiple masterminds. So I don't have a mastermind, so I'm not even promoting my own mastermind or anything like that. I have joined 2 or 3 different masterminds when I was starting this off. And it would have been a much slower and more painful process. I don't know if I actually would have really built this up the way I did. It's just, it's very foreign, all these little things you need to do and all the systems and all the tech and everything. I don't know, it's worth every dime to join a mastermind and have that community and have those resources and group that you can just go and ask questions when things pop up. I think in this business too, there's a million one-off situations, there's all this gray area and guest issues or, stuff pops up all the time. And to have a community where you can just go and ask questions of how to get advice on how to deal with something is super helpful.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, and I think when I got started with Airbnb, it was in 2012. Back then, there were no masterminds, so there was nothing really. But it was also like so much easier to make money, right? Because it was literally like you throw something on Airbnb and the phone will go ping, 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 and like, you know what I mean. So I think in the current climate, it's if somebody is going to start from scratch without any education or any support from communities. It's pretty hard with the support of the communities, right? Let alone like if you're trying to figure everything out yourself.
Yep, agree.
Do you have any funny stories to share from your experience renting out these homes? Anything crazy happen?
Oh boy, crazy. Well, we use Ring doorbells. I guess the funniest Ring doorbell one was, this was when I only had like 2 properties. So I was actually paying attention to the Ring doorbell, occasionally. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly what happened, but for some reason I checked it and I saw there were a bunch of cars in the driveway. And I was like, whoa, there's not supposed to be that many cars in the driveway. And then I looked again like 10 minutes later, and there's a whole mariachi band standing at the front door with like a PA system and, microphones and all this stuff waiting to go in. And it was a family who was in town for a wedding, and they were throwing a party the day after the wedding. And, but we were like, oh my gosh, what should we do? Neighbors, blah, blah, blah. And so we were all worried that they were throwing this raging party. We couldn't get a hold of the guest. This is, again, this is one of the ones that was an hour away from us that we own. So my husband drove up there because we were just like, we can't, there's a mariachi band standing there. And so he knocks on the door and opens the door, and it's like a bunch of grandmas dancing, super innocent, like family party. But still, we were like, we're so sorry. We just can't have a band in the backyard. We actually felt really bad breaking it up, but we were like, sorry, and they were nice about it and it worked out. But that was probably one of the funniest ones where it was just like, you know. And then we've had our share of just, what on earth is going on while people are there. I have no idea those situations. But my motto is just fix it and move on. It is so not worth getting emotionally worked up over any of it. You just fix it and move on. It's so random at times, and it's just not even worth like wasting an ounce of energy stressing about it.
Yep, I think we've all learned that through the experiences. I'd love to talk a little bit about your podcast, right? So Seed Money Podcast. What's the podcast about?
Yeah, so the podcast is really about that early stage entrepreneur who maybe has an idea or they've already invested some of their own money. They've got a little bit of traction or, they've gotten customer feedback and now they're going, I really need to go get other people's money to take this, to market or really make it a real business. And I just love that stage of entrepreneurship. When people have ideas, there's so much passion that has to go into a company at that stage. When you're ready to go out and take someone else's money to grow your idea, you have to be so passionate and so all in and excited. And I just love that stage. And it's also so hard to know what to do. And, I think it's a lot of the content out there is from the VC perspective or the small percentage of entrepreneurs who exited for, a gazillion dollars. And while I think all of that is super, super important and valuable experience, obviously, and those people are amazing, I think there's a bit of a gap in content around that more just early stage human side of, the mental process of what you're going through to raise that first round of funding, some of the tactics, that you want to use. It's very different than when you're going for an institutional round, down the road. And now there are some VCs doing seed funding. There's all kinds of dynamics, but I just love that stage. And somebody asked me about a year ago, like, what would my perfect day look like? And I said, well, I would spend time with my family. I would exercise every day, and I would basically talk to entrepreneurs all day about startups. That was like my, if money were no object, if, blah, 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 that's what I would do all day. And then I kind of had this realization. I was like, well, I can do that now. Why am I waiting? I've got my short-term rental business functioning really smoothly. And, it's not taking me a gazillion hours. I probably spend, 15 hours a week on it. And so I went dove headfirst into trying to figure out like how to do a podcast and ended up hiring a company to basically produce it. I was like, I don't want to burn myself out trying to do a podcast now. So I want to set it up so I can do this ongoing. I have no idea what to expect from it. I've committed to it for 2 years and we'll see what doors it opens. And it's just so much fun. I'm loving it already. I'm interviewing other entrepreneurs in the early stage or who've gone through this early stage and talking about my experiences and stuff. So it's really, really fun. I'm excited.
Yeah. I can relate to that because that's kind of like how I got into this podcast too, of like, hey, no one's really talking about this Airbnb thing. I love talking about it, so let's interview some hosts and publish it, and then 10 years later, it's become something much bigger than I thought it would. So
there you go.
That's amazing. Well, actually, when it comes to raising seed, right? Because this is actually like our company that I founded with my business partner Eric Freewild. That's something that we talk about a lot. It's like, should we try and raise some seed money? Does that make sense, or do we just like add some new revenue streams so that we can just support ourselves through those other revenue streams while we're building this business? What you call bootstrapping, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you give any advice on like, how do we make a decision? Like what's the better route to take? Because we're always like jumping back and forth between those two options.
Yeah. And I think it's smart to think through it because it's two very different routes and each have very different challenges and obligations, right? once you do raise money, you're setting yourself on a path that is hard to reverse. You know what I mean? Now you have investors. So I just talked to some friends who are in the same situation last week about this, and they were talking about going out and raising money. And I said, well, what's your end goal? You know, do you want to sell it? You know, and they were like, oh, we haven't really talked about that. And so I was like, first thing is really figure out what that end goal is. And if you guys are aligned and the end goal is to say to sell it or to be able to hire a CEO earlier so you're just an owner and not necessarily an operator. If those are your goals, or you just have this passion to like grow it bigger, to impact, have an insanely positive impact on as many people as possible, that end goal is so important because that's what the investor is going to want to know, right? And that will also help you decide if you need, that money. If you're like, no, we just want to kind of, pull profit from it and just have an owner's draw, and we'll do that for the next 10 years, and we're cool with that, then you probably don't need to go raise money. But if you have that bigger goal, you're going to have an exit of some sort in mind, for that investor. Or, if we reach this milestone, are we profitable enough to then repay them? But ultimately, typically their investors are going to want to see some sort of exit. So that would be my recommendation is, really hash out what that end goal is. And that should help you kind of decide if that's the right route or not.
I think it was like one of the 7 habits of most effective people or something, that book, where I think that's one of them, have an end in mind, right? With everything you do, have an end in mind. So it's just, that's good advice. And then, you talked about there's raising money from the VCs, right? The institutional side, but then most companies, most entrepreneurs will start with like a small friends and family round, right?
Yep.
If somebody was thinking of doing that, what would be like some first steps, or like some kind of basic one-on-one type of knowledge that they would need?
Yeah. So I think first thing you want to do, there's 2 really simple ways to raise a friends and family round or a seed round from angel investors. Convertible notes, and then what's called a safe note. And the benefit with both of those is you don't have to determine a valuation up front. The paperwork is very simple. It's much more simple than, a full-on equity round. And so it's going to cost you less money from an attorney perspective. So talk to an attorney, step 1. You need to kind of incorporate or have your entity structure in place. And then basically ask them about, convertible note paperwork or a safe note. And then you can basically take that, what your terms are, hey, we're trying to raise a total of $1 million. We're going to do a minimum of, $25,000 each. Or if it's $100,000, a minimum of $5,000 each. And then, basically have a pitch deck, even if it's just a very simple one of, I always recommend doing a business plan. Even if you don't ever show it to anybody, it's going to give you the background to be confident to talk to investors about, what you need and what you're doing. And then basically just getting it in front of people. And, the best way to do it is just say, hey, I'm going to start, raising money. Would you mind just listening to my pitch, and just start practicing it? And then networking your ass off, because you just never know. Like, I raised that initial almost $500,000, and they were from non-friends and family investors I had never met. Many of them I met through, 6 different connections. Someone introduced me to someone, and so on. So, I think it's really figuring out what your terms are going to be, what your structure is going to be, which convertible notes are a great way, or safe note. And then from there, have your ducks in a row, your materials, make them as professional as possible, and then just start talking to people. So make sure you get enough money, a long enough runway. That's one thing I think is, just really make sure. You might not want to raise more money, or you might, what am I trying to say? Basically, you don't want to have to raise more money 6 months later. You know what I mean? So
Right.
give yourself enough wiggle room that you've got a chunk of money to work with for, at least a year.
Yeah. Because then the next step will be to raise like a real round with evaluation and like, giving away equity and stuff. Because the first seed round is you don't determine a certain amount of equity, right? You just say like when we raise the next round, you're gonna get a discount on that raise, but right. So you don't really determine evaluation or equity or anything which makes it so attractive to do it this way, right?
Yeah. So let's say right now, the convertible note paperwork would say, sometimes an investor might ask for interest on it. So they're going to accrue interest on, say, that $100,000. A year from now, when you go to raise that next round and you do it as an equity round, and let's just say the share price is determined at $1, their 100,000 might convert over at, say, 80 cents, compared to $1. So they're getting a 20% discount. So yeah, that's the incentive and motivation for them to kind of come on as an early investor.
Yeah.
They're getting a little bit of a better deal.
And then I guess if we're not able to do that next round and we just burn through the cash, we're at the end of the runway. Then we don't owe anything to those investors, correct?
Yeah, you definitely make sure you set it up that way. So sometimes convertible notes can be due and payable. So you want to make sure you set it up that, and that's where you want to talk to a good attorney and ask them, what is the worst case scenario? How am I protected? That is one thing I did correctly, was set up all my paperwork and structure correctly. I have a lot of friends who got sued when they ended up having to pivot out of their companies. Losing houses, stuff like that is not fun, right?
Ooh,
So
that sounds scary.
yeah, talk to an attorney and just say, what is the worst case scenario? How can I protect myself? Don't personally guarantee, stuff. So definitely doable to set it up, the right way, but you just want to make sure you talk to a good attorney for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. I have one last question that just kind of popped up as we were having these conversations. Like going back to that original company that you founded, the wine company, right?
Mhm.
I'm just curious, like what's the sort of the mental journey when you decide to step away from it? Because like people have invested in it, and like how is that? Yeah, how is that mental emotional process from walking away from it?
Not fun. No. Ultimately, I think it takes some very, very deep reflection, right? On like, what do I want my life to be about? At the end of the road, I always think this way, if I'm not here in 5 years, how do I want to spend the next 5 years of my life? The next year? We have no idea, right? It really can be over in a moment. And I think it really came back for me to living a life without regret. I have no regrets in trying things. Like, I'm so glad I've always gone for it and given it a shot. And I don't think I'll ever regret that. But if I stayed in something that I was just miserable in, right, and wasted years, and I come to that point, at the end of my life, whenever that is, that I feel like I would regret. Or, if again, I have my son now, I love spending time with him. Like, I'm not trying to grow this huge company right now. That's not my priority. My priority, he's only going to be little and want to spend time with me for so long. So my priority is really spending time with him. So I think it's really digging deep to what is important to you, and then being, honestly, just having the kind of balls to go for that, and no matter what anybody thinks of you. I mean, the first time when I quit my job to start the wine company, my friends and family thought I was absolutely nuts. They're like, you have an amazing job working for Burton Snowboards. What are you doing? You have the dream job. Why are you doing this to yourself? They thought I was nuts. And then when I, stopped and decided to pivot out of the wine company, people were like, what are you doing? You got to deal with Mark Cuban. Like, you're crazy. Why are you doing this? Like, keep going, keep going. But everything in my soul was telling me, like, to not kill myself going down that path. So I think it just really takes digging deep and figuring out what is important to you, what are your values, and then just having the courage to kind of act on it despite what anybody else thinks, which is not always easy, as we all know, right?
No, it's definitely not easy. It makes sense on a logical level, but to
Yeah,
actually like practice it is a whole different story, right?
but doable for sure.
Um, awesome. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been absolutely amazing. The everything that you shared, very interesting. Before we wrap up, you want to tell people where they can find your businesses, your podcast, any anything you want to share or
Yeah, absolutely. So the management company is atlas-vacations.com. And then would love to have people check out the Seed Money podcast. Obviously, Seed, if you just search Seed Money in any podcast app or seedmoneypodcast.com. And then I'm on Instagram, Jayla Siciliano. I'm not, I don't do tons and tons on there, but I love connecting with people. So yeah, I would love to hear from people if anybody has any questions about, the seed money side of things. I love chatting about that stuff. So it's fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining today. And to the listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode. And of course, we will be back soon with a new one. See you then.